1 week before Christmas 1806, Napoleon Bonaparte rode into Warsaw, convinced he was just one more campaign away from mastering Europe. Within months, his armies would be fighting in blizzards at Eylau, crushing the Russians at Friedland, and shaking hands with the Tsar on a raft at Tilsit. A moment that seemed to seal his dominance over the continent. But behind the parades, treaties, and grand speeches, Napoleon was also laying the foundations of the mistakes that would one day destroy his empire. In this video, we'll follow his march from the mud of Poland to the triumph at Tilsit, and see how victory itself began to turn against him. If you enjoy deep dive history, told with clear maps and careful detail, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next campaign. French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte arrived in the Polish city of Warsaw, then part of the Kingdom of Prussia. 1 week before Christmas 1806, a year had passed since his crushing victory over Austria and Russia at Austerlitz, and just 2 months since he had smashed the Prussian army at Jena. But Russia still had a major field force in being, the First Army under General Bennigsen. Napoleon could not truly call himself master of Europe until this army was beaten, and both Russia and Prussia were forced to make peace. That winter, Napoleon's first attempt to trap Bennigsen near Pultusk foundered in the deep Polish mud. The Russians slipped away to Białystok. The French army, half-starved, exhausted, and freezing, was ordered into winter quarters. While in Warsaw, Napoleon began a famous affair with a young Polish noblewoman, Marie Walewska. In the late 18th century, the once mighty Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had been carved up by its neighbors, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, in a series of partitions. In 1795, the third partition erased Poland from the map of Europe. Polish patriots now looked to Napoleon as their potential savior, hoping that his victories over their occupiers might restore a Polish state. Marie Walewska became Napoleon's mistress in the hope of advancing that cause. But ordinary French soldiers felt little affection for Poland. To them, it was poor, bitterly cold, and a long way from home. Desertion rates soared. There were even around 100 cases of suicide. Marshal Ney, commanding 6th Corps, sent out patrols in the direction of Heilsberg, hoping to find better quarters for his men. Instead, they ran into Russian and Prussian troops on the move. Ney's men had stumbled into Bennigsen's surprise winter offensive. Napoleon reacted at once. He devised a plan to trap the Russian army. Ney and Bernadotte were ordered to pull back and draw Bennigsen westward, while Napoleon led the bulk of the Grande Armée north, aiming to fall on the enemy's flank and rear. But the plan was compromised. Russian troops captured a French courier carrying the Emperor's orders to Marshal Bernadotte. Now alerted to the danger, Bennigsen ordered a retreat, fighting a series of rearguard actions against the pursuing French. Yet he refused to abandon the key city of Königsberg without a fight, and turned to offer battle at a small town called Eylau. The Battle of Eylau, fought over 2 days, was one of the bloodiest engagements of the Napoleonic Wars, a brutal struggle in freezing conditions, with neither side willing to yield. Marshal Augereau's 7th Corps, advancing into a snowstorm, lost its bearings and blundered into the killing zone of the Russian guns. It was shattered by artillery fire. 5 French Eagles were lost. Napoleon's army was saved only by a massive, concentrated cavalry charge, around 10,000 horsemen led by Marshal Murat, in an assault remembered as one of the great cavalry charges in history. Even so, at Eylau, for the first time since becoming emperor, Napoleon failed to win a clear-cut victory. Both he and the Russians concealed the true scale of their losses, but each side is estimated to have lost around 1/3 of its army. After the horrors of Eylau, both forces needed time to rest and recover. Meanwhile, The newly formed French 10th Corps, under Marshal Lefebvre, laid siege to the port city of Danzig, defended by 13,000 Prussians under General Kalkreuth. Danzig endured heavy bombardment and repeated infantry assaults. After 8 weeks with no hope of relief, the Prussian garrison surrendered on the 27th of May. Napoleon's northern sea-facing flank was now secure against any Russian landing. The French Emperor commanded about 190,000 men, against roughly 115,000 Russian and Prussian troops. But once again, Bennigsen moved first. On 4th of June, he launched a surprise attack against Ney's 6th Corps. Ney carried out a skillful fighting withdrawal and managed to escape. Having lost the element of surprise, and with Napoleon advancing, Bennigsen pulled back yet again. 4 days later at Heilsberg, the French lost around 10,000 men in a poorly managed assault on strong Russian positions. The next day, the Russians continued their retreat. Napoleon assumed Bennigsen would fall back towards Königsberg. Instead, the Russian commander slipped away to the northeast, keeping to the east bank of the Eylau River. Thus, when Napoleon's main army marched north, it was Marshal Lannes's reserve corps on the French right flank that first made contact with the Russians near the small town of Friedland. Late in the afternoon of 13th of June, Russian cavalry scouts informed Bennigsen that they had found a single isolated French corps at Friedland. Bennigsen decided he had time to cross the Eylau and crush this corps before the rest of Napoleon's army could intervene. He ordered his forces to begin crossing the river. Lannes, with just 16,000 men facing about 46,000 Russians, sent an urgent message to Napoleon, warning that he was under attack from the main Russian army. Then he set about conducting a masterful delaying action, using a broad screen of skirmishers to disguise the weakness of his force while slowly yielding ground. As darkness fell, Lannes was still holding off the Russians. That night, Russian engineers constructed 3 pontoon bridges at Friedland to speed the passage of troops across the river. But Bennigsen was taking a huge gamble. If the engagement turned into a major battle, his army would be fighting with its back to the river, and with the millstream cutting between its left and right wings, a dangerously exposed position. He had also badly underestimated the speed with which Napoleon's forces could react. The first French reinforcements reached the area during the night. The Emperor himself was not far behind. At dawn on 14th of June, around 40,000 Russian troops were on the west bank of the Eylau. Bennigsen ordered an attack on the village of Heinrichsdorf in an attempt to turn the French left. But French cavalry under General Grouchy rode to intercept them. After more than an hour of charges and countercharges, the French cavalry finally drove the Russians back. Marshal Mortier's 8th Corps now arrived to strengthen the French centre. In Sortlack Wood, General Oudinot's elite grenadiers fought stubbornly against Prince Bagration's left wing, but were gradually forced back by superior numbers. Around midday, on a sweltering day, Napoleon himself reached the battlefield. Behind him came 1st Corps under General Victor, temporarily replacing the wounded Bernadotte, Ney's 6th Corps, and the Imperial Guard under Marshal Bessières. The date, 14th of June, had special meaning for Napoleon. It was the anniversary of his victory over the Austrians at Marengo 7 years earlier. A good omen, he declared. The battle then entered a brief lull as Napoleon surveyed the field, recognized the danger of Bennigsen's position, and issued orders for a general attack. Bennigsen, who was in poor health throughout the day, also realized he was now confronted by the full weight of Napoleon's army and gave orders to withdraw. But before the Russians could disengage, at about 5:30 p.m., 3 salvos from the French guns signaled the start of the assault. Ney's 6th Corps led the attack on the French right, driving Bagration's infantry out of Sortlack Wood. As Ney's men emerged from the trees, however, They were raked by heavy fire from Russian guns positioned across the river. The attack faltered. Bennigsen rallied his troops and launched a cavalry counterattack. Ney's corps fell back. At that moment, Victor's First Corps advanced on Ney's left. Victor's artillery commander, General Senamon, pushed 30 guns forward to point-blank range and opened fire with case shot. Within minutes, hundreds of Russian soldiers were cut down. Under this devastating bombardment, Bennigsen's troops began to waver, then broke and retreated. Around 7 p.m., the Russian Imperial Guard launched a last desperate counterattack to try to halt the French advance on Friedland. They were outnumbered and outgunned. As French shells crashed into Friedland, setting buildings ablaze, the French centre and left wing joined the attack. With their only line of retreat threatened, the entire Russian army now surged back towards the river in growing panic. But Friedland's burning houses and wrecked bridges turned the town into a trap. Many Russian soldiers drowned trying to cross the Eylau. Others were cut down or taken prisoner. Some units north of the town managed to escape via a ford or by moving along the riverbank. But there was no hiding the scale of the disaster. Friedland was one of the most decisive victories of Napoleon's career. For about 10,000 casualties, he inflicted roughly twice that number on the Russians. Around 20,000 men killed, wounded, or captured, about 40% of Bennigsen's army. The Prussians abandoned Königsberg the following day, and Soult's Fourth Corps occupied the city. Bennigsen's shattered forces retreated across the Niemen into Russian territory. Tsar Alexander's advisors urged him to seek terms with Napoleon. He agreed, and a ceasefire was arranged. Alexander and Napoleon met for the first time aboard a raft anchored in the middle of the Niemen near Tilsit, and quickly established a cordial rapport. Tilsit became the scene of one of history's most famous diplomatic gatherings. The two emperors spent days exchanging honors, parades, and banquets, then talking long into the night about the future of Europe. A kind of personal friendship developed, while their former ally, King Frederick William of Prussia, found himself isolated and sidelined. Prussia paid the heaviest price in the treaties of Tilsit, signed 2 weeks later. About 1/3 of its territory was taken to create the new Kingdom of Westphalia, ruled by Napoleon's 22-year-old brother, Jérôme, and the Duchy of Warsaw, placed under the King of Saxony, a state that many Polish patriots hoped would be a stepping stone to full independence. Polish troops were recruited into the Grande Armée. Polish lancers even became part of Napoleon's elite Imperial Guard. Russia, by contrast, surrendered only the Ionian Islands. In return, Alexander accepted an alliance with Napoleon, leaving the French emperor seemingly dominant on the continent. The Tsar also agreed to join the continental system, Napoleon's economic blockade of Britain, which barred British ships and goods from all ports under French control. The system had been proclaimed the previous winter by the Berlin Decree. Napoleon hoped that cutting British trade with Europe would trigger financial chaos and political unrest in Britain, forcing it to negotiate peace on his terms. There was one major flaw. The continental system did not work. It was impossible to enforce fully, was widely undermined by smuggling, and hurt French commerce as much as British. The decisive weapon in this economic war turned out to be the Royal Navy. That summer, Britain underlined its naval superiority with a preemptive strike on neutral Denmark at Copenhagen, seizing the Danish fleet before it could fall into Napoleon's hands. British squadrons blockaded major French ports, intercepted ships trading with France, and ensured that British merchants could continue to operate overseas with relative security. The Royal Navy even occupied the tiny island of Heligoland, turning it into a base for smuggling British goods into Europe. Most damaging of all for Napoleon, the continental system drew him into two conflicts that would prove disastrous for his empire. The first broke out in the Iberian Peninsula when Napoleon decided to force Portugal, a traditional British ally, to join the blockade. In November 1807, French troops, supported by their Spanish ally, invaded Portugal. The Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil, and French forces occupied Lisbon without firing a shot. It appeared that Napoleon had gained yet another easy victory. In reality, the Peninsular War was only just beginning. If you'd like to see how this easy victory in Iberia turned into a brutal quagmire for the Grande Armée, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. And let me know in the comments. At what point do you think Napoleon's fall truly began? Here, after Tilsit, or later in Spain and Russia?